Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for another installment of our global webinar series on prematurity awareness, brought to you by the Preemie Parent Alliance and the National Perinatal Association's Family Advocacy Network. Throughout the month of November, we're bringing you conversations with NICU parents from around the world. We'll have conversations with families from Brazil, Ireland, Canada, the Gambia, and today, Australia. Throughout these conversations, we are beginning to have a better understanding about what binds us all together as NICU families. What is similar no matter where you live, and what are the unique challenges that families face that depend on where they live. So today we're focusing on Australia, which has a preterm birth rate of 8.6, which is just slightly lower than that of the United States. In Australia, 15% of all babies are admitted to a special care nursery or neonatal intensive care unit. And while low birth rates have held steady, they are seeing that the late preterm birth rate has been increasing. Joining us today is Kylie Pussell. Kylie is a NICU parent. She's the mother to 3 surviving miracle babies and is also the CEO of Miracle Babies Foundation. Kylie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So, Kylie, I'd love to start off our conversation learning a little bit more about all that you've experienced. Of course, we've had a brief conversation before, and you really have gone through so much, just like your quote here on the screen says, that you never imagined the struggles that you would have to endure to have a family. Would you mind sharing about those the first 2 experiences that you had when you first were struggling with infertility?
Yeah, I as I said, never imagined it would be so hard to have my family, and the challenges have been life-changing along the way. So I had my first miscarriage at 10 weeks, and 12 months later I was diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome, which made then falling pregnant another challenge. So yeah, it was quite some difficult years, and then I fell pregnant with twins with some support, and only to go into premature labour at 16 weeks, and obviously those babies way too early and could not survive, and it was just shattering, completely shattering for myself and my family. Just really felt like there were so many hurdles that we had to overcome, and you always think then, well, nothing more will happen. You know, we've had our challenges and our difficulties, and surely it gets easier from here.
Right. So how long had your infertility struggles? I mean, it says, obviously you experienced several years. So how long exactly was that until you did fall pregnant with the twins?
Yeah, so just going through about 2 years of that, that up and down, that monthly cycle where every month is hopeful, but yeah, then turns to sadness and heartbreak.
Right. That's something that I am going to guess that many of our listeners will have experienced as well. I also struggled with infertility, and I remember those, month after month, and it wasn't working, and it's devastating. So then you were able to get pregnant again after the loss of the twins. And tell us about this pregnancy.
I was monitored quite closely with my next pregnancy because we didn't really have any answers as to why my waters had broken so early, and the miscarriage. So I was monitored every fortnight, having cervical ultrasounds. And at 22 weeks, I was hospitalised that day. I went in for my scan and did not come home from the hospital that day, and was put in to have emergency surgery to have a cervical stitch put in. I remember my obstetrician actually saying to me, he was explaining to me the risks, of surgery at 22 weeks gestation, which was quite scary. But he actually he said to me, if we don't do this, you're going to go into labour today, and at 22 weeks, your baby cannot survive. So it was definitely, I just had to do it.
You were admitted and didn't come home until after the baby was born, and you were able to um, prevent any more preterm labor until 30 weeks.
Yeah, so I was in hospital. I was on bed rest for 8 weeks, so that was quite challenging in itself, in a little hospital room, quite alone, and obviously family visiting when they could, but life still rolled on. They still had work, they still had things to do. So I was a little bit like a lone ranger in that hospital room for a long time. I did briefly come home once or twice, but had to go back in because the ultrasounds were still showing weakness in my cervix, even with the stitch in place. So I was allowed to go home just on about 30 weeks. My doctor was happy to just then let me go home and continue the bed rest at home. And after 2 days at home, my membranes ruptured and went in and to the hospital and gave birth that night.
Wow. And so you were discharged home thinking, okay, we'll be watching things a little bit for a little bit longer, but I imagine you didn't expect to be delivering 2 days later.
No, not at all. And whilst it was scary at the time, while I was in hospital, we'd also had the opportunity to have a tour of the NICU to see what the room looked like, what the ward looked like, to say hi to some of the staff, see the equipment. So for me, that was really comforting to know that with my baby being born at 30 weeks, she would have somewhere to go and receive the right medical care at the right time. So it was just, I guess, luck of where we live, that we did live close by, and our local hospital happened to have a NICU, being a tertiary hospital. But yeah, there's so many families that don't live close by to those tertiary hospitals and do have a lot of travel and challenges involved.
Right. And so you were able to get that tour. So when you had the tour and then your daughter was born, what was that like when you went in to see your own baby for the first time in the NICU?
She was very tiny. She was having some breathing support at that time, so it was really scary. As I said, we sort of knew what the room looked like. We knew what the equipment looked like, but when you see your own baby there, and and you haven't been able to protect that baby and keep that baby, growing inside the womb for longer, it's a lot of guilt that you go through, as you know, and just looking at your baby really brings that home, that your baby should be still in your tummy, and right now here it is, needing all of this extra care.
You had the miscarriage at 10 weeks. You lost the twin at 16 weeks. Then you have Madeline at 30 weeks. So, and you were, pretty basically diagnosed high risk from the beginning of the pregnancy with Madeline. What was that like for you when you were on bed rest, having these previous losses, and then being alone? It sounds like, well, you did get a tour of the NICU. Did they have any support services for you while you were on bed rest in the hospital?
At that time, not a lot, mostly just through the actual staff and the nurses. So definitely, identified having people to talk to that had been through something similar at that time would have been wonderful. But yeah, it was just really reliant on your own family and friends who hadn't experienced it. None of my circle of people had experienced that before, and the staff who are dealing with it quite regularly, but they don't have the time to sit down there and talk to you all day, and it's very different when they're giving you the clinical care. It's totally different aspect of the conversations that you're having with them.
Right, absolutely. So Madeline was in the NICU for 6 weeks, is that right?
Yes, yeah, she came home, at 6 weeks, and yeah, it was quite petrifying, but we were absolutely thrilled to be taking her home.
Tell me a little bit about her NICU experience.
While Madeline was in the hospital, she actually had quite a good stay. We didn't have any significant issues while she was in there, so we were really lucky in that regard. But then there was also, the Brady's, apneas, all of those that, preemies go through. She did have a lot of those, and as she got closer to her going home date, we did try to breastfeed her, but it was a challenge for me. I did continue for a while to express my breast milk until I was exhausted and couldn't do it any longer. But yeah, I was actually expressing milk and then feeding her through the bottle, because I think I'd just become accustomed to the pumps, and it just just didn't work for us on that occasion. But she was, yeah, it was just so good to have her home.
Oh, I bet. And and that is so common for NICU parents or NICU moms and their babies. Breastfeeding is challenging even when you have a healthy, typical newborn, and when you have a preterm baby, there's so many other challenges that can make that even more difficult for mom and for the baby. So, so you had Madeline at home, and then you got pregnant again and suffered yet another miscarriage.
Yeah, I did. I had also around the same time had surgery on my cervix, so to try and make that a bit stronger for any future pregnancy. So when we did fall pregnant again with twins, it was really scary, but had a lot of faith in the surgery and that I guess our problem or my challenges were now fixed. But yeah, quite young and naive, I think I was looking back, and yeah, and it was just another, it just felt like hurdle after hurdle.
Right, absolutely. And so tell us about this pregnancy. So yet again, hospitalized at 22 weeks and on bed rest.
Yeah, there seems to be something about the 22-week mark with me for some reason. There was funneling and beaking and things down the cervix. So yeah, went into hospital again and on bed rest. But because I'd already had the stitch put in prior to falling pregnant, there wasn't any further surgery that could be done. So it was only just relying on bed rest to hopefully take the pressure off the cervix and hold on for as long as I could.
Right. And this time they were delivered at 25 weeks, and again because of the premature rupture of your membranes. Is that right?
Yes, so yeah, membranes ruptured at 25 weeks, and they tried to stop the contractions for about 2 days, but in the end the contractions were way too strong. They couldn't stop them, and because I had the stitch in the cervix, there was also a risk of of that rupturing. So I yeah, got wheeled off about 1:30 in the morning for emergency C-section.
And how old was Madeline when the twins were born?
She was just over 2, so yeah, dealing with wanting to be in hospital or needing to be in hospital with a sick or preemie baby, but then also needing to care for your other children. It's a very, very challenging time, and you feel very torn and a lot of guilt.
Right. Oh, I can only imagine. And so tell me about Scarlett and Marcus. What was, Marcus lived for how many days?
At birth, Scarlett weighed 645 grams and Marcus weighed 780 grams. So it was just, yeah, absolutely petrifying. Madeline was a little bit bigger, so seeing these babies so much smaller and so much more vulnerable was a complete shock once again. And Scarlett had some CPAP breathing support, so she was not on a ventilator. She was resuscitated, but then went on to CPAP. Marcus was resuscitated at birth, and then he was actually on the ventilator. Scarlett, being the smaller twin, were quite more concerned about her, thinking that Marcus was that bit bigger and hopefully a bit stronger. But yeah, on day 2, I got woken up in the postnatal ward to go up to the nursery, and just woken up with the words of, one of your babies isn't doing so well. So being woken up at 2 in the morning, to that news was yeah, just a complete shock. And even though you know the risks, you never think anything will actually happen to you. So yeah, was taken up to the nursery, and then to find out that yeah, Marcus was not doing very well. He'd had several major complications, and they were continuing. So my husband came in, and over the next couple of hours, while they were caring for him and monitoring him and doing tests and things like that, it was that complete fear where you almost can't breathe properly.
Right.
And then yeah, that day just before lunchtime, his little body just couldn't quite pass away.
I'm so sorry, Kylie, for you experienced so much loss in your journey to be parents. And talk a little bit about this, because it's quite common when multiples are born so preterm that both or all, depending on how many babies are born, don't always make it. So how were you able to, or did you feel like you even had the chance to grieve for Marcus while Scarlett still had quite a long road in front of her?
It was a really tough hospital journey with Scarlett and Marcus. When Marcus passed away, it took us many weeks for us to be able to have his funeral. And the biggest fear that was going through my mind at that time was if something was to happen to Scarlett, that they should be together.
Mm-hmm.
So that was always there in your back of your mind, that you didn't know if she was able to get through this as well. So it was something where it was hard to actually grieve, because you had to keep expressing your milk. Like, I had to keep going in, I had to keep getting up and doing what I needed to do every day for Scarlett and Madeline. So they definitely, in a sense, got me through that time, because I was a mum. I had to look after these two girls, and that was really hard. And I think the next 4 months while Scarlett was in hospital, it was always there. It was always, that was where Marcus was cared for. That was his cot. That was his home. That was the only home he knew. So it was hard going back there all the time, but it also had such a good connection. And I think with the hospital staff, so many of those nurses cried with me nearly every night. So that was his home.
Yeah. So you did feel supported by the staff in the hospital?
The majority of the time, yes, everyone in the NICU is very busy, but majority of the time, yeah, I think having been through it with Madeline and having had some relationships with the staff that way, and them knowing me that little bit longer, was definitely helpful. But it was a very lonely time. It's not a time where I really connected with any other parents in the unit. I was probably quite withdrawn myself, and I was now a bereaved parent. So, people sort of, yeah, it's awkward, I think, for people to reach out to you, and I certainly wasn't in the right place to be doing that at the time for me. So it was a very lonely, isolating journey with Scarlett in there. But as I said, having Madeline and being torn between hospital and home and caring for both the girls certainly kept me busy. But the next 12 months, I think, when Scarlett did come home, that's when probably the real grieving for Marcus started.
And so how long did Scarlett spend in the NICU?
She spent 4 months. She had quite a few close calls herself, so she's definitely a little fighter. She got neck and was quite with that for a few weeks, but luckily did not require surgery. And she had some infections, blood transfusions, and it was just about, I think, 34 weeks gestation when she developed retinopathy of prematurity. So she had laser surgery on both her eyes. So she was taken to the Children's Hospital for that surgery. And what was really unique about that was when she went over to the Children's Hospital, she was quite close to coming home. And she's starting to have suck feeds and breathing pretty much on her own. So she was doing really, really well. And when she went in to have the surgery on her eyes and she was ventilated for that, she actually didn't wake up, and so she actually came back to the ward and was still on the ventilator. So it was a really horrific time, because it almost felt like we were so close to getting her home, and what has happened now. And she remained ventilated for 5 days, and the doctors could not at that time find any answers as to what was happening. And the neonatologist called me about 7:30 from the Children's Hospital, and she said, "Kylie, come in first thing in the morning. I think I've got a diagnosis." And so they went, we had a meeting, and they had thought that she had a condition, which I'm probably not the best at pronouncing it, but central anticholinergic syndrome. And it was very rare to be seen in a baby, but they felt that that she had this condition, and it was where certain medications keep the anaesthetic in her body for longer. So she was having eye drops every 12 hours. So it was decided to stop or change the eye drops, and it was just amazing. Within like 5-6 hours, she was awake, she was back to herself, she was breathing. And yeah, and they realised or put it down to this condition, and that the eye drops were keeping the anaesthetic in her body, and she just wasn't able to flush it out of her system. So it was, yeah, it was just another really, really tough time that we never expected to have that, so close towards the end of her hospital journey.
Scarlett did come home, and then you were able to get pregnant again with Liam, but this time you stayed pregnant for 38 weeks. How were you able to do that?
It was so amazing to actually go full term, and I'd had more surgery again, so it was a new procedure, and it was a transabdominal circlage. So I had that pre-pregnancy, and it was, yeah, putting a stronger band around the cervix to try and keep some strength there to keep the pregnancy. So yeah, I actually went through and had quite a relatively normal pregnancy, which was just a thrill. I remember getting right through to sort of the 38 week, or close to being to having him at 38 weeks, and I remember my back aching, and I'm thinking, "Oh, I can't say anything, no, no," because it was just such a thrill to actually get there, and it was a scary pregnancy in regards to, I felt I was sort of on the edge all the time. I didn't know if anything was going to happen. Every time I would get up from sitting down or move, it was just like, is it going to happen now? You know, are my membrane's going to rupture again? So that was really, really scary. But as I sort of got past the 30, 32 weeks, I really started to enjoy it. And I mean, being pregnant is just such a beautiful time. And it was, yeah, just a completely different experience. I had Liam by C-section, and it was a planned day surgery event, and it was just so strange compared to what we'd been through before. But I was awake for his delivery, so that was wonderful. So Liam was just an absolute joy going right through to 38 weeks, and yeah, just when we had him, I remember after the C-section, I had to go back to recovery, and then when I finally got back down to the ward, my husband was there, and he was a little bit lost, and I felt a bit the same, because we had babies that came home in 4-hour feeds, and they were already rostered, and we were like this. We felt like first-time parents again, because we hadn't cared for a baby straight after birth before. So it was a really surreal experience.
And so were you able to hold him right after delivery then? After the C-section?
Yeah, so I was awake for the C-section, and actually, yeah, got to hold him and actually get some photos with him, you know, straight away when he was born. So that was an experience that you don't realize, I think, until you, like when I did have it with him, how much we had missed out on with the others, and that whole emergency situation, and not really seeing them until they were in a humidity crib fighting for their life. And here was this baby, you know, so much bigger than we had experienced before, and yeah, and just breathing on his own, and not needing any help.
That is, oh, I mean, I'm getting teary just thinking about the joy that you must have felt that day when he was born, to have that experience of, you know, hearing him cry, being awake, being able to hold him, and then not having to send him to the NICU, and you got to be discharged together instead of, you know, like NICU parents, you know, we get discharged, but we have to leave our babies in the hospital. So you actually got to carry him out with you. And I'm just so glad that you were able to get that experience. That's just wonderful.
It was really nice to have that experience, yeah. And as I said, it certainly makes you realize what you do miss out on when you have a NICU birth, because yeah, just things that should be the way they should be, and it just doesn't go that way when medical support is needed to that degree. And you know, and I think most preemie parents feel that total loss, that feeling of loss of control and guilt, and as you said, separation, not being there all the time, or not having those wonderful joyous moments at birth.
So you had, now were Scarlett and Madeline and Marcus, were they all, did you deliver at the same hospital both times? So were they in the same NICU unit both times, or did you have different NICU unit experiences with your different babies?
So I had all my babies at the same hospital, at Liverpool Hospital in Australia, New South Wales, and it was one big room, and there wasn't a lot of privacy. If anything happened in the unit, you know, everyone could sort of see or hear what was going on. So it certainly wasn't ideal for those really tough days that you actually did get any privacy. So it's one big room, but yet it did allow for, you know, some interaction with the parents. So in Australia at the moment, there's a lot of units being rebuilt as times change, and new research and evidence comes out. So a lot of the new rebuilds are modelled for family integrated care, which is fantastic. So, you know, really helping give that privacy and that space to parents, and giving them part of, you know, that comfortableness to be part of that team. But the thing is, the hospital where we had our babies, it actually hasn't had a lot of changes to it, so it is still quite relatively the same design. So hopefully very shortly, you know, in Australia, all of these hospital units can be redesigned and rebuilt to care for the new evidence that we know helps babies and families.
Right. So how involved were you able to be in the care when you were in the NICU? Were parents given 24-hour access? Did you get kicked out when there was an adverse event going on with another baby? What was your access to the unit and your access to your baby? Were you included in rounds? You know, talk to me a little bit about what your involvement was.
When I had my babies, we had 24-hour access to the unit, so we were able to come and go when we liked. We could phone the hospital and talk to the staff at any time to check in on how the babies were doing. And I was one of those parents who rang every time I woke up. Just having that comfort to know that, you know, even though I couldn't walk into the nursery or my baby's room here right in the house, that I could at least put a phone call in and see how they were doing. Because if they were at home and you woke up through the night, well, you would go check your baby. So, was really good that we had that access to do that. We were able to do care, so changing nappies, you know, cleaning the face, those types of things. In regards to anything more, there probably wasn't that much interaction by the parents back that time when I had them.
So you mentioned family integrated care. So is this something that is then kind of being embraced countrywide by Australia, or is it a delivery of care that's very specific to a couple of hospitals?
Family integrated care, I think, across the country is being adopted quite well. There are hospitals that are doing a lot of different parts of it. There are some that are just choosing what might work best in their unit. I think it's just that changeover period. I think as new evidence keeps coming out and more evidence that backs it up, and you know, the positive impact for parents and families, I think it will become a lot more widespread. But it's definitely getting momentum, and it's amazing to see how much interaction that, you know, through FICare that the families can have. And you know, they need that. They need to be part of this team, and they're the parent. They need to feel like the parent as well, not just a visitor.
Right, absolutely. So what do you think what are the two biggest challenges that NICU families in Australia face?
Definitely there's a couple of big challenges for families here in the country. Things that keep coming to us at Miracle Babies Foundation is the design of units and the rebuilding of hospital units to cater for FICare and for the families to have all their requirements and amenities that they need to spend more time at the hospital. So that's definitely something that Miracle Babies is raising their some awareness and putting our voice behind, because the evidence speaks. We know that, you know, these parents and babies just do so much better. So definitely that, in getting our governments to change the design and put the investments in where needed. And there's actually two other probably big challenges that we have here in Australia. The other one is some form of extended parental leave. So working around, you know, to cater more for these families for their individual circumstances. Not everyone is falling into the same, you know, leave requirements and needs for their families. So I think we need to be a lot more adaptable for those families and offer more support for them. Especially, you know, mums might have given up work much earlier than they ever anticipated, and then they actually get a lot less time at home if they're on maternity leave, getting a lot less time at home before they're having to go back to work. You know, the baby is much younger than they would have expected. So there's lots of challenges around that. Also, you know, that extra support needed for dads at that time as well. And the other thing is more access for babies to either mother's own milk or donor breast milk. So it's just something that's being trialled out here in Australia in small areas, and some hospitals do have them, but it's not widespread to have milk banks. So that's something that, same again, the evidence is there. We know that these babies, especially very preterm ones, you know, the more support they can get from mum's milk or donor breast milk is just going to help them with their outcomes. So that's the few things that we're really talking a lot about here in Australia this World Prematurity Month, and it's something that we're really proud to be able to advocate for parents and put our voice behind.
That's wonderful. Now, tell me about Miracle Babies Foundation.
Miracle Babies Foundation formed in 2005, and our founder Melinda Cruz had been through the experience of having her son early and wanted to be able to stay connected, give back to the hospitals, and yeah, so we formed Miracle Babies Foundation. The hospital put her in touch with some other parents. I'm one of the co-founders, and Miracle Babies was born. And 13 years on, it's still the same core beliefs that we had way back at the start in, you know, supporting families, being able to connect to each other, and supporting the hospitals, and sharing the journey, raising awareness with communities of what these families go through. Like, these are really challenging times, and it's a traumatic experience. So we do that through, we've got a family support program, which we call our Nurture program, and that's got a couple of different ways that parents can access support and families. We participate in research, we raise our voice for advocacy for parents, and we raise funds and work with communities to, you know, improve the lives of people in the community by providing more access, families, and funding and resources for hospitals and our programs. So we do a lot, but we definitely are able to do what we do because we do have an awesome bunch of staff and volunteers, you know, right across the country, parents and supporters that want to be able to give back and help this experience be that little bit easier for others.
And tell me, so Australia is a pretty big country. Is a large part of it rural?
Yeah, so we have 23 NICUs across the country, and they are in mostly the capital cities or major cities. It's really a very different experience for the rural families. There is a lot of land in Australia, as you said, and rural areas. So for these families, they actually have to travel. They get transferred from maybe their local hospital to the tertiary hospital. The more that we can put in place through our programs and helping them connect with others in the hospital at the time and the right staff support is vital, because, you know, dad mightn't be there with mum, or it's just mum, and it's just such a lonely time. And then you add in the financial stresses as well. You know, a lot of these hospitals don't have long-term accommodation for these families to stay at, either while baby's in hospital, and it's just heartbreak, especially if you have other children as well. There's a lot to take under consideration, and I think we can definitely do that better here in Australia. We need to do that better.
So many of the challenges that you talked about in Australia, our families here in the US face as well. And it sounds like, though, that Miracle Babies Foundation really does a wonderful job of reaching so many families. How do you think you're able to do that? What do you think your greatest strength is as an organization?
I think Miracle Babies Foundation has worked really hard over the last 13 years to build really good, strong relationships with our hospital staff, right from the neonatologist right through to allied health and neonatal nursing staff. We pride ourselves on working closely with those hospitals and tailoring our support and resources to what their families need, because it is a unique experience for everyone, and everyone comes with their own challenges for their life. So it's something that I think has definitely secured Miracle Babies in being able to improve and enhance the care for families and just provide more support and access for families right across the country. But it's definitely in partnership with the hospitals that we're able to do that.
That's wonderful that the hospitals have embraced you over the years and recognize the important part that you play in the overall support and well-being for these families. That's just wonderful. So let me ask you, I've got two more questions. One, I believe the picture we have on the screen now are your children.
Yes,
right?
last year, yes. So they are, yeah, growing up, not little bubbers anymore, but will always be my babies.
So, Kylie, for families that might be listening or watching our series, what is something that you want them to know? What is the most important thing for a current NICU family to know?
I think it's really important for families to know that it's okay to seek help, to access support and resources. People have been through it before, and people beside you are going through it as well. So connecting with them can just assist you so much. And it's really important just to say, hey, I need some help, or I need to talk to someone, because the better we are feeling ourselves as parents, the better we're going to be for our children. So access and find that support. And in Australia, Miracle Babies is quite easy to find. Just just jump on the computer or the phone and reach out, and we can connect you with someone. It's such a unique experience, so don't be shy. Support and get help if you need it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Kylie. I think I could talk to you all day long. The passion for what you do and everything that Miracle Babies Foundation stands for is just so inspiring. We're so glad to be forming a relationship with you across the ocean, and just hope that there will be many other ways in the future for our organizations to work with you. The Preemie Parent Alliance and the National Perinatal Association's Family Advocacy Network are, devoted to all of the same core values that Miracle Babies Foundation has, that we're representing families, that families are getting the support that they need, the access to care that they need. And something that you pointed out several times is how while there are similarities in what might bring you to the NICU, each individual experience is different, and support does need to be tailored based on all the different factors that come with a family that find themselves in the NICU. So we're just so thankful to know you and to have this conversation with you. We just want to thank you again, and Miracle Babies Foundation, for all that you do for families. Thank you to those that are listening. Remember that all of our recordings will be available throughout the month of November for Prematurity Awareness Month, and we'll be posting resources and links related to each recording and each country. So be sure to check our websites and our social media throughout the month. And if you want to learn more about getting involved with either the organization and country that we are highlighting at the time, or with Preemie Parent Alliance or National Perinatal Association, just reach out. Thank you so much for being with us today, Kylie, and have a good Prematurity Awareness Month.
Thank you. You too.